I don't doubt that many people have experienced unhappiness while reading a bank statement. It's likely a common occurrence, probably leading to disasters far worse than my own. But that realization didn't offer any comfort, not in the slightest. I was simply going through some papers on my wife's desk at home, innocently looking for evidence of bill payments or something similarly mundane. That's when I stumbled upon it, tucked away under a stack of bills and miscellaneous items. It was a bank statement from Barclays, which caught my eye because we typically handled all our banking with HSBC. The blue color of the heading stood out amidst the paperwork. Ironically, she had chosen a different bank to keep it concealed, but it was that very difference that piqued my curiosity, prompting me to take a closer look. First, I checked the name at the top, Jenny Matthews, no surprises there. But the address was unfamiliar, located somewhere in the West End of London, far south of our home in Cambridge. Next, I glanced at the balance at the bottom, £17,546, a significant amount, but its origin puzzled me. Then, I examined the list of transactions over the past 3 months and was stunned by the regular influx of large sums of money. £600 one day, over £1,000 a week later, followed by £800 just 6 days after that, and so on. While I earned a decent living from my business and was accustomed to dealing with substantial sums of money, Jenny only worked part-time for a public relations company, filling in occasionally for events or functions on weekends or evenings, and it wasn't particularly lucrative. What truly bewildered me were the regular withdrawals listed on the statement, £567 deducted by standing order every month. The figure sounded eerily familiar. I walked over to her cabinet, an antique roll-top desk from the late 19th century, and retrieved my wife's banking file. Jenny was always meticulous and organized, and I knew exactly where to look since we shared everything, no secrets between us, or so I thought. I found the HSBC statements and quickly scanned through them until I found what I was seeking. I didn't hesitate to go through her bank details, as she routinely shared them with me. There it was, plainly stated in black and white, her salary from the agency, £567 every month. I was utterly bewildered. It appeared that Jenny was paying herself her own salary from her own bank account. Why on earth would she do that? Does she even have a job at all? Where did the money come from in the first place? Is this something to be concerned about, and is it any of my business? Certainly not. What is Jenny up to? I retrieved the Barclays statement again and examined it more closely, realizing that almost the only money ever withdrawn appeared to be the monthly payments, while the deposits were sporadic, frequent, but lacking any discernible pattern. It then dawned on me that there was significantly more money coming in than going out, so I glanced back at the balance at the bottom of the last page. Bloody hell! It wasn't £17,546. I had missed a zero, and it was £175,460. Fucking hell! My name is Jim Matthews, I'm 38, reasonably presentable, and I own my own computer business, where I employ 2 others. My wife Jenny is 28, exactly 10 years younger than me to the week, which, to my mind, is just about the right age difference. I offer her my maturity, such as it is, my life experience, and a very comfortable lifestyle. She brings me her relative youth, her abundant beauty, and all the joy in the world. We both give each other our love, both spiritually and physically, without reservation. After 3 years of marriage, we are undoubtedly still deeply in love with each other, as I had been since our first date. I had been in London for a meeting with someone to discuss a deal with Google, and I was sitting in the hotel bar afterward, contemplating the potential benefits of going along with their proposal. Then Jenny walked in, and my heart skipped a beat. It's not that I didn't have a girlfriend, I probably had too many, but none of them were that special. Somehow, I knew she could be special, but only if I got to know her. Jenny was 5'6", slender, with beautifully shaped, tanned legs that seemed to go on forever, from the delicate high heels on her feet to where they disappeared under the very short cocktail dress she wore. She had long dark hair and deep brown eyes, with a cute little turned-up nose. My dream girl wasn't a classic beauty, but she didn't need to be, and every man in the place must have been eyeing her up, all undoubtedly with similar thoughts to my own. She exuded refinement, elegance, confidence, fun, and sexuality, and not necessarily in that order. I'm sure everyone watched her as she glanced around, nodding to the receptionist who obviously knew her, likely a frequent guest. Then she locked eyes with me, and a surge of excitement filled me as her warm brown gaze dispelled any uncertainty about my desire for her. I returned her smile, feeling unsure about what to do next, but before I could fret over it, a radiant smile that could have brightened the street outside spread across her face, and she approached me, her hips swaying gracefully to accentuate her slender figure. Her breasts, ample but not overly large, moving in sync with her steps, hinting that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't wearing much underneath that dress. "Hello, you must be James," she said, surprising me. "Jim, not James," I corrected, my voice slightly husky. "James, Jim, what's the difference?" She chuckled, and I saw no point in arguing with her. "May I join you?" she inquired, her tone refined yet sweet with a distinctly British upper-class accent. "Of course, please," I eagerly responded, rising to pull out a chair for her. Even the way she seated herself exuded elegance, as if she had been trained in the art of sitting gracefully at some prestigious finishing school. I wondered, why me? What had I done to capture the attention of this stunning woman? How did she even know my name? "I'm Jenny," she introduced herself. "Apologies for being late, got held up." "Thank you for waiting." She then glanced at me and asked, "Are you all right, Jim?" I was, indeed. But she later chuckled as she recounted how utterly flabbergasted I had looked. I quickly regained my composure, and in no time, we were engaged in light-hearted banter, pleasantly surprised to discover our shared interests: music, tennis, Indian cuisine, and even rugby. Jenny was well-educated, capable of conversing on a variety of topics, unlike the shallow companions I had been with recently. Then her phone rang, and she excused herself to answer it. I overheard her say, "No, I'm here." "No, he's here too." "Impossible, he's here with me." "Oh dear, oh golly, just a moment." She glanced at me quizzically, her smile returning, and I mirrored her expression. "Were you expecting me by any chance?" she inquired. "No, but I'm thrilled you showed up," I quipped. "You're not James Green after all, are you?" "No, I'm Jim Matthews." "Oh goodness," she exclaimed, giggling, and lifted her phone. "Mistake," she exclaimed into it. "I was late, and I've got the wrong James, or Jim, actually." Her posh accent combined with her casual use of profanity was delightful, sounding out of place yet perfectly natural. She turned her head, partially covering her mouth so I couldn't overhear her conversation with whoever was on the other end of the line. I knew I was about to lose her any minute now, desperately trying to think of something witty to say the moment she finished the call. Then Jenny turned her attention back to me, still holding her phone, a smile playing across her lips, almost turning into a grin. "No, he's quite cute actually," she remarked into the phone, but her gaze remained fixed on me, ensuring that I heard every word. "Rather good looking in a rugged sort of way." I felt a blush creeping up my cheeks. "All right then. Pass on my apologies. Perhaps next time he's in the UK," she concluded her conversation, slipping her phone back into her bag. "Well then," she said, turning back to me. "Looks like I've missed my appointment." "No matter, it can wait." The smile never left her face. "Assuming you're free this evening, what would you like to do, and shall we do it together?" I refrained from expressing my first choice and suggested dinner instead. She readily agreed, and that's exactly what we did. It was the most memorable meal of my life, yet I hardly paid attention to the food. I was already captivated by her charm. Jenny shared stories about her job in PR, detailing how she arranged meetings, organized discreet events, and facilitated connections for her agency. It was evident that she enjoyed her work, and I found myself hoping that she could come to love me just as much. After dinner, I escorted her back to the taxi stand, delighted to see a small queue, which meant more time for conversation and, hopefully, to hold her close. I draped my arm around her, and she nestled against me, slipping her arm around my waist. I planted a light kiss on her cheek, and she reciprocated, her sweet scent sending my senses into a frenzy. Then she glanced around, positioning me between her and the others in the queue, wrapped her arms around my neck, and drew me down until our lips met. It was heavenly. Though brief, it felt like discovering paradise. And here I was, holding the sweetest nectar in my arms. I got carried away and nearly embarrassed myself, kissing her with fervor, running my hands over her back, savoring the soft curve down to her bottom. "Hey! Hold on! Hold on," she exclaimed, then laughed. "Give a girl a chance, won't you? We've only just met." I pulled back, disappointed yet not really. Frustrated yet not really. She was someone special, worth the effort, worth the wait. "Sorry," I apologized. Got carried away, and she giggled once more, deliciously. "Slow down," she advised. "Kiss me slowly. It'll be worth it in the long run." I was utterly smitten, and I think that's when I fell in love with Jenny, my future wife. That marked the end of our first accidental date. I suggested going back to my hotel for a nightcap, but she playfully rejected the idea, teasing me that I wanted more than just a drink and that a first date was too soon. "Can I see you again?" I inquired, and she teased me again, indecisive about whether it would be worth it, all the while holding onto me, pressing her beautiful slender body against mine, igniting a burning desire within me. "All right," she finally relented, shrugging her shoulders. "I'll give you a call." "What's your number?" "I don't trust you," I replied boldly. "You give me yours, and I'll call you." "No can do, Jim," Jenny replied softly. "I don't give my number out, especially to handsome strangers, I'm afraid. I'll give you a call." We reached a compromise and agreed to meet the following Tuesday, which felt like a long wait for me but was the earliest she could manage. What was I going to do about this newfound knowledge regarding my wife's financial affairs? Why did she have access to such a substantial amount of money, and where did it come from? True, her parents were wealthy, owning an estate in Kent and having connections to a smaller merchant bank. It wasn't unusual for my wife to have money, including significant sums, but the question remained, where did it originate, and why in irregular yet substantial amounts? It seemed likely that her involvement with the public relations company was related, but the specifics eluded me entirely. I considered confronting her, but the thought was daunting. If she was keeping this information from me, there had to be a reason, and I was determined to uncover it regardless of the consequences. I admit, it did make me nervous. Despite seeming improbable, it appeared that Jenny might be entangled in something dubious. A few days later, I found myself in London and decided to investigate the address listed on the statement. The area was affluent, exuding an aura of old money, precisely the sort of environment where Jenny's family would feel at ease. That provided some comfort. I observed the brass plates on the door, noting names like Corporate Agency and Golden Circle Agency, though none rang a bell. The other businesses seemed mundane, mostly accountants or stockbrokers. After waiting for a while, I realized no one was entering or leaving the premises. It was a dead end. Feeling stumped, I contemplated confronting Jenny, but the prospect was unappealing. She was clearly keeping secrets from me, and now it seemed her family might be implicated as well. I needed to understand what was happening and, more importantly, why. Our second date was memorable, and I distinctly recall her outfit, snug denim jeans paired with a white sweater, a combination that accentuated her beauty. The attire was stunning, the type that designers like Pierre Cardin drew inspiration from, perhaps envisioning women like my wife as their muses. She possessed a captivating allure, reminiscent of those who sparked legendary tales. We attended the theater and enjoyed a late dinner afterward, although the details of the meal escaped me. Later, we walked along the banks of the Thames, arm in arm, much like countless lovers throughout history. I assumed she would return to my hotel, and she did. I assumed she would accompany me to my room, and she did. However, my assumption that she would join me in bed was met with a refusal. Despite this, we still had a pleasurable time together. I managed to persuade her to remove her sweater, revealing her beautiful, firm breasts, which exceeded my expectations. I savored every moment, gently caressing them, teasing her nipples, licking, and even sucking them until she moaned with pleasure. She pulled me into a passionate kiss, her tongue exploring my mouth, igniting my senses. I indulged in caressing her breasts, savoring their softness and the tautness of her nipples. Moving downward, I found myself undoing the button of her jeans, eliciting a gasp from her lips as she eagerly responded to my touch. But then, abruptly, she stopped. Recognizing the gravity of our actions, she whispered a plea for us to pause, her hand holding mine in a silent request to cease. "I'm not ready," she murmured, her hips still yearning for more. It was a challenging moment, one of the toughest decisions I'd faced. I withdrew, though my hand lingered over her abdomen, a silent acknowledgement of her boundaries. We embraced, kissing tenderly. Despite being adults in our 30s and 20s respectively, she wasn't prepared, not yet. I inquired about her concerns, and she tearfully affirmed them. I held her close, offering reassurance and comfort as she poured out her emotions. We lay together, my desire giving way to a profound love for her. After some time, she composed herself, expressing gratitude for my understanding. As we cuddled, I contemplated confronting Jenny about the mysterious influx of money and her self-payment. One possibility was family wealth, perhaps funds discreetly set aside to evade taxes. It was a tempting theory, but it felt too simplistic, too convenient. Feeling a growing unease, I decided to follow her one evening to London, observing her movements during a work assignment for the PR firm. I tracked her outie, monitoring whether she indeed attended the hotel meeting or rendezvoused elsewhere, fearing a sinister revelation. However, she arrived at the correct hotel as planned, gracefully stepping out of her car and smoothly handing over the keys to the attendant. There was no cause for alarm, despite the hours I had spent following her from Cambridge. Feeling foolish, I resolved to confront her that very night. The explanation, I assumed, would be straightforward. But she didn't return home that evening. Instead, I was awoken by the ringing telephone the next morning, pulling me out of my restless sleep on the sofa where I had waited for her. "Hi, Jim," she greeted cheerfully. "Apologies for not calling last night. I got caught up in discussions and the company provided a room at the hotel. It went well, though. I'll be back before lunch. How about meeting at the Bull?" "Why didn't you call?" I asked, feeling worried. "I did," she replied with concern. But there was no answer. "I left a message." Indeed, the message light was blinking on the phone. She must have called while I was returning from London, and I hadn't noticed amidst my distractions. Agreeing to meet her, I was still perplexed and overwhelmed. The following week, I followed her again, consumed by self-loathing for my lack of trust and the suspicions clouding my mind. Our third date was a crucial moment. I had hoped it would go smoothly, without the tensions of the previous encounter. We met halfway between London and Cambridge at a charming inn I had discovered, where Jenny seemed at ease from the start. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere became charged with anticipation. I undressed her slowly, sensing her nervousness despite her beauty and maturity. Determined to make it a memorable experience, I caressed her gently, savoring every moment of her vulnerability and uncertainty, knowing I wanted to cherish her first time. Jenny's gasp of pleasure echoed in the room as my finger delicately explored her warmth, eliciting a tight grip on my arm and a clenched teeth moan as it glided through her moist folds. Her breath was quick and heavy, eyes shut tightly as I continued to caress her, deliberately teasing her swollen clit. "Jim. Jim, please, Jim," she huskily whispered, her words trailing off as a shudder of ecstasy ran through her body, leaving her speechless. As she relaxed, her eyes met mine with a declaration of love. "I love you, Jim. I think I'm ready now." "Please, be gentle," she stammered with uncertainty. Standing up, I began to undress, Jenny's gaze following my movements before shyly turning away as I removed my underpants. Gently spreading her legs wider, I knelt between them on the bed, cupping her breasts and savoring their softness against my hands. Jenny's eyes darted nervously, unsure like a startled kitten. Her gaze dropped to my naked body, her breath catching as she noticed my arousal, her thighs instinctively trying to protect her. "Oh, Jim. Are you sure? Will it be all right? Please don't hurt me," she pleaded, her eyes brimming with fear. Leaning in, I reassured her with a tender kiss. "It'll be okay, my love. I'll be gentle. It'll be okay." As the tip of my cock met the softness of her pussy, Jenny shuddered, her legs tightening around mine as her body tensed. Gripping my arms tightly, she guided me, her lust overpowering her initial apprehension. Yes, Jim. Do it now. For God's sake, do it now, she urged, a tear escaping her eye as she willingly surrendered to pleasure. Her body tensed as I entered her, a moment of anticipation before she slowly began to move against me, her breath ragged as she adjusted to the sensation, whimpering with delight with each movement. Gently, I regained control, withdrawing and pushing back in with increasing rhythm and intensity, eliciting squeals of pleasure from Jenny as we made love. We lay together afterward, basking in the intimacy and contentment of the moment. Thank you, Jim, Jenny whispered against my chest, expressing her gratitude and love. Returning her kiss, I echoed her sentiments, expressing my own love for her. I needed that, Jim, Jenny confessed after a moment. I've needed that for a long time, and I'm just so glad it was you. The second time I followed Jenny was easier. I knew the hotel where her meeting was scheduled and arrived after her, feeling foolish and unsure of my intentions. As I hesitated in the reception area, I spotted Jenny chatting with a well-dressed older man, likely a client of the agency. Relief washed over me as I realized my suspicions were unfounded. Yet, as Jenny stood up, looking stunning in a dress I hadn't seen before, a tightness gripped my chest. Why had she changed outfits for an evening meeting? Suppressing my irrational thoughts, I watched her interact with the man, feeling a pang of jealousy as she smiled and touched him in a familiar way. The thought crossed my mind that perhaps he was a friend of her father's, an old family acquaintance like an uncle. But deep down, I knew it was wishful thinking. When Jenny reached up to kiss him on the cheek and he returned the gesture on her lips, my heart sank into darkness. Rage surged through me as they lingered in the embrace, a betrayal unfolding before my eyes. I stood frozen, unable to tear myself away as Jenny grew more affectionate towards him, mimicking the gestures of intimacy she reserved for me. They kissed again, and I felt a suffocating weight on my chest, unable to breathe amidst the agony of witnessing my beloved Jenny lost in the arms of a stranger. "Can I help you, sir?" a uniformed staff member interrupted. "Folk off," I snapped, my voice echoing too loudly in the tense atmosphere. Chaos ensued as security intervened, forcibly removing me from the premises as I watched Jenny and the stranger disappear together, their laughter mocking my shattered reality. Bruised and defeated, I returned, consumed by the torment of imagining what transpired behind closed doors. The money became insignificant in comparison to the betrayal unfolding before me. Despite the heartbreak, our subsequent encounters were blissful, reminiscent of young love, and I felt rejuvenated. Jenny's demeanor remained unchanged, and I was eventually introduced to her delighted parents, who spared no expense in celebrating our union. 6 months later, we exchanged vows in a lavish ceremony funded by our wealthy parents, overshadowed by the lingering pain of the past betrayal. I vaguely attempted to understand if there was some underlying reason behind Jenny's apparent virginity into her 20s, considering it was unusual in modern times. However, she avoided discussing it, promising to share her story someday. Despite this mystery, we were deeply happy and in love, so it didn't seem to bother us much. The first 6 months of our marriage were pure bliss. However, if you were an employee working for me during that time, you might have found it challenging to get any coherent communication from me. Nonetheless, everyone around me was happy for us, even our competitors, who seemed unusually considerate during that period. Reality struck hard when we lost a major client, prompting me to refocus on my business. Although I never neglected Jenny, she sensed the shift and appeared somewhat downcast. "What's bothering you, Jenny?" I inquired repeatedly, genuinely concerned. She sighed and confessed, "I'm feeling a bit bored." "Not with you, not at all, you're wonderful." I smiled, relieved to hear her thoughts, although our intimacy had dwindled lately. "I need something to stimulate me, to keep my mind engaged. Maybe I could do some work for my former agency," she suggested. Jenny had left her job at the agency after we got married, and despite seeming content, something was evidently missing from her life lately. "Do you think they'd take you back? Have you talked to them?" I asked, considering the idea. Jenny beamed, indicating her decision was made. "They've been contacting me every month since our wedding, begging me to return. I've hinted that I might go back part-time." It was settled. She visited the agency the following week and commenced part-time work shortly after. Her return brought back her enthusiasm, and our household felt rejuvenated. I had no complaints as Jenny regained her zest for life and our sex life became even more passionate than before. She became open to new experiences, willing to explore anything except for oral sex. Surprisingly, she embraced it all with natural skill and enthusiasm, particularly enjoying oral pleasure. I didn't question why I was blessed with such pleasure, I simply cherished it. The next 2 years were blissful, our earlier issues fading away. We cherished every moment together, and I felt a pang of longing when she was away, especially during her trips to London for work. Then, everything changed when I found that bank statement. I couldn't fathom how she could betray me like this, but the evidence was undeniable. I had witnessed her intimately embracing her lover in the hotel, his hand on her rear, fingers disappearing beneath her dress. The thought made me seethe with frustrated rage. How could she do this? What did he offer that I didn't? Was it his age, his wealth? Perhaps it was someone from her workplace, maybe even her boss. My mind raced in circles, contemplating the possibilities until I felt on the verge of tears. It was the morning after I was ejected from the hotel, and I couldn't bear it any longer. I wondered how many times she had come home late after rendezvousing with him, without my knowledge. She finally joined me in bed, already changed into her nightgown. I pretended to be asleep, refusing her advances, my anger simmering beneath the surface. Eventually, she relented, and I felt a sense of relief mingled with sorrow. The next morning, I was up early, fully dressed. She entered the room, her beauty momentarily distracting me from my resolve. However, the bruises on my face from being thrown out a second time snapped me back to reality. "What happened to you?" she exclaimed, genuine concern evident in her voice, though I couldn't bring myself to respond. Jenny moved to approach me, but I raised my hand to halt her, my expression likely conveying my turmoil. "What's wrong, Jim?" "What happened?" she asked urgently. "I was kicked out of a bar last night," I replied bluntly. Her response caught me off guard, though I probably should have anticipated it. "What? You? Thrown out of a bar?" she exclaimed in her distinct English accent. "You silly man. Did you get drunk or something?" She grinned, almost giggling at the image of me, usually so respectable, being tossed out of a pub. "I hope it wasn't the Bull, Jim. We're supposed to go there tomorrow night." Her grin faded as she realized I wasn't reciprocating. From now on, I resolved to relish these exchanges, finding some solace in making her reckon with her actions. "What's wrong, Jim?" she asked simply. "Sit down," I instructed. "You might want to." I paused, savoring the tension in her expression. She sensed something was amiss but remained clueless about what. I wasn't thrown out of just any pub. It was a bar. A hotel bar. A hotel bar? What hotel? "One in Cambridge," she inquired, puzzled by the direction of our conversation. "Not Cambridge. London. The West End, Knightsbridge area," I clarified. A flicker of concern passed over her lips, but it was fleeting. Knightsbridge was where she had spent the night. "Which hotel?" she asked, her gaze dropping. She likely knew what was coming. "The Grand Central," I stated calmly. "Near the square. Sound familiar, Jenny? Maybe you've been there? Recently?" Jenny ran her hand across her forehead and then looked up, attempting to muster a smile. She didn't grasp the extent of my knowledge. Frankly, neither did I. "Okay, yes, I was there last night." "I was working," she whispered, before speaking more confidently. "Jim, you knew I had a meeting there." "I told you. I always keep you informed." "What's this about?" "It's about who you were with," I replied, outwardly composed but inwardly in turmoil. She stared at me, unsure of what to say. "A client, just a client," Jenny finally uttered, her voice wavering. I think she realized she was defeated. "And do all your clients get to grope you? Do they treat you like they own you? Do they all get kissed as if they're your lover? Do they all get to stick their fingers up your—" I couldn't contain my anger any longer. Jenny looked at me, her facade crumbling as tears streamed down her face. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was heartache, our heartache. Despite everything, I still loved her. I resisted the urge to rush to her, to comfort her, and assure her everything would be okay. It was too late for that. I waited, unwilling to utter the next words. What she said next could make all the difference. After a while, she looked up, tears still streaming down her face, and whispered, "I love you, Jim," before breaking into sobs again, her whole body racked with grief. I waited for her to calm down, allowing her to speak first. "What did you see, Jim?" she asked timidly. "I'll tell you what I saw, you." I began, anger surging through me. "I saw you smile at him, kiss him, stroke his back while he fondled your backside. I saw you both heading arm in arm toward the stairs, his hand halfway up your dress. That's what I saw. I assume you were headed to his room. Am I right?" Jenny looked at me with a sadness I'd never seen before. She started to deny it, then stopped, realizing it was futile. Instead, she nodded silently, confirming my worst fears. Her eyes reflected utter despair. "I suppose you slept with him all night, then had the nerve to come back here covered in his cum, reeking of him," I accused. "That's not true," she cried. "I showered before leaving the hotel. I'd never do that to you, I promise." I wasn't sure her promises meant anything anymore. "Then why did you change in the other room? Why not in ours like usual?" I pressed. "I didn't want to wake you. I didn't want to disturb your sleep," she replied, sounding genuine but not excusing her actions. "And why was that?" I demanded. "Because you didn't want me to know how late you got back?" "Maybe," she whispered almost inaudibly after a pause. "And not for the first time, I bet," I accused, her silence confirming my suspicion. "What do we do now, Jenny?" I asked after a heavy silence, only her sniffles breaking the quiet as she struggled to compose herself. This wasn't going as satisfyingly as I'd hoped. "I don't know, Jim. But I do love you, only you. You're the only one," she pleaded. "Oh, yes, Jenny. You love only me, yet you sleep with someone else behind my back." "Very convincing," I retorted bitterly. "It was just sex, not love." "It was exciting, but just sex," she insisted. "And there's a difference?" I challenged. "Yes, there is," she nodded. "Please, Jim, understand there's a big difference." I wasn't in the mood to understand, my anger rising. "Who is this man? How long has this been going on?" I demanded. "He's not my lover. I just met him last night," Jenny replied, calmer now but still crying. "I met him at the hotel, just minutes before you saw us." "Oh, sure. And I'm supposed to believe that? He bought you a drink, got you drunk, took advantage of you." I scoffed. "No, Jim, it wasn't like that," she whispered. "I was working. He paid me for sex." Jenny's story. "I suppose you all must think I'm awful, and I can't blame you. It shattered Jim when I confessed that the man in the hotel had paid me for sex, that I was essentially a call girl. I tried to convince him otherwise, that I worked as an escort girl, but I couldn't even convince myself anymore. He called me a cheap prostitute, and that stung. It made me cry. The word prostitute just hits differently, and I couldn't bear to think of myself in that way. It might seem like a trivial difference in words, but it's what allowed me to live with myself all this time." "And cheap?" "No, I certainly wasn't cheap, not by any standards. My clients were all wealthy individuals who could afford my services, along with the commission taken by my agency, Golden Circle. They were top politicians, athletes, and CEOs, coming from various parts of the world. Some of them were regulars, seeing me once a month or even for years, a couple of whom I'd known before I met Jim. I prayed that he'd never find out about them. They came from diverse backgrounds, British, American, Canadian, French, among others. Most of the time, they sought my company during their visits to London, often for business, but sometimes they'd invite me for weekend getaways or longer trips before I married Jim. Those outings cost them a significant amount, several thousands, but I like to believe they got their money's worth. When I was with them, I was their girlfriend, their mistress, attentive and affectionate. For my clients, I must have been the ideal partner, available at their beck and call with a simple phone call, ready to fulfill their desires. I never directly accepted money from them. It went through Golden Circle and then into my secret bank account after I got married. I never touched that money, couldn't bring myself to, as it had long stopped being about money. My supposed monthly salary was transferred to my regular account to conceal my activities, and I made sure Jim saw it regularly to avoid suspicion. Then he found that damn statement, the man I loved completely and desperately found it where I had hidden it overnight, and my world crumbled. I cried for a week, my eyes red from grief. Jim stormed out of the house, sobbing like a child. I couldn't believe I had hurt him so deeply. It was foolish to think I could keep it hidden forever, and I don't know what I was thinking. It had become my way of life. I had stopped escorting for over 6 months after we married, but it was like an addiction, and I fell back into it. I could argue that I was coerced, but that's too easy, and I no longer deserve easy. I've lost that privilege. I had no idea where he had gone, where he was staying, and despite my calls, he refused to speak to me or even listen. I was desperate, almost suicidal. Despite understanding his pain, I knew he loved me, or at least had, and I couldn't comprehend how he could shut me out so abruptly like that. I isolated myself from everyone, without a single friend in the world. I realized my lifestyle had given me many so-called friends, but none I could confide in, not a single one I could pour my heart out to. There was one, of course, but he wouldn't speak to me, and who could blame him? I had declined several dates and informed them I wasn't feeling well. I must have sounded dreadful over the phone, so they probably believed me. Besides, I was in no condition to entertain any men. Shamefully, even during that time, I never considered telling them I was done with that lifestyle. I hope it was merely because I couldn't think clearly about it. After about 10 days of no contact, not even Sarah at his office would connect me to him. I decided to go there myself. By then, I had stopped crying all the time, and my eyes had somewhat recovered. Despite applying makeup, I still looked disheveled. While I'm considered quite pretty, I'm not naturally striking like some girls, but I've always made the most of my appearance. I've had the best education money can buy, and I possess a good figure. I know how to carry myself, having been trained by the best at my finishing school in Switzerland. I know how to engage in conversation, laugh at men's jokes, and discuss topics of interest to them. I have a dazzling smile, but that's just how I was born. I was accustomed to heads turning when I entered a room, and I loved it, almost expected it. But that day, no heads turned at all. "Jenny, you look awful," Sarah exclaimed when I approached her desk. We had become quite friendly over the years, but she was usually discreet, so my appearance must have shocked her. "I'm sorry, Jim's not here." "When will he be back?" I asked, struggling to hold back tears. Sarah looked at me sympathetically, stood up, and took me gently by the arm. "Come on," she said. "I'm due for a break. Let's go get some coffee." Over tea, actually, she informed me that Jim had seen my car in the parking lot and had left through the back door as I entered through the front. He had informed her that we had a major argument but didn't disclose the reason, which relieved me. "He won't talk about it," she mentioned. "He's in a terrible state. Do you want to talk to me about it?" "I can't," I replied. "But it's my fault, not his." "That bad, huh?" Sarah remarked, giving me a knowing look. "Worse than that," I admitted. "Much worse." "I think you need someone to talk to about this," she suggested. "Someone close to you whom you can trust." It was good advice, but I had no one. I was close to my parents, being an only child, but how do you broach such a conversation? "Daddy, I haven't mentioned this before, but I've been working as a prostitute since I left Oxford University, and my husband just found out." No, it was impossible. I had no one, and I would have to figure it out on my own. But it didn't turn out that way. The agency kept calling me, and eventually, I had to confess what had happened, that my husband had found out. "Oh dear," they said, but that was about it. The last thing they wanted was to be involved in a marital dispute. Then a week later, Rolf called. Rolf was another American client of mine, nearly 60 but in great shape, a good lover. I had known him since before I met Jim. We got along well, and I suppose I had some deep feelings for him, although nothing compared to what I felt for Jim. Anyway, he was married, and I had even met his wife once, introduced as a junior business contact. Rolf was one of only 2 dates to whom I had given my telephone number. I trusted him. "Sorry, Rolf," I said when I heard his voice. "I'm not available at the moment. Might not be for some time." "Golden Circle informed me about your situation," he replied over the phone, and I couldn't hold back my tears. "You need someone to talk to, don't you?" Rolf suggested. "Let's meet somewhere. Maybe I can help." "Oh, Rolf, please no, don't ask me out. I'm not in a state to give you what you want." "It's payback time," he said quietly. "Time for me to do something for you instead of the other way around. No messing around, I promise. Let's meet at the usual place." "No, not there. I'll come up to Cambridge." "Where do you suggest?" 5 hours later, I sat in front of Rolf as he began to inquire. "Do you want him to come back?" he asked first, and I admitted that, of course, I did, but it seemed unlikely. "If not, then I would be more than happy to. Well, you know Polly and I haven't been getting along so well for some time now, and I thought." "Please, Rolf, don't go down that path. I like you, okay? I have feelings for you in some way, but you're not Jim." "Sorry, but you're just not Jim," I interrupted him gently. Rolf nodded sadly. "I expected that, Jenny. Sorry, but I had to ask. Had to get it out of the way." I smiled at him. He was so understanding. "Jim won't talk to me, Rolf. He just won't. I don't know what to do. I can't understand how, if he loved me, he could cut me off like that. And I don't think you fully realized how much you've shattered him, his entire world, young lady," Rolf replied gravely. "But he doesn't understand. It was just sex. It's something I need, the excitement. It's like a drug, and I can't seem to exist without it. Being with different men all the time, not knowing who I'd be with from one week to the next. I can't seem to explain it to anyone." I poured out my feelings, explaining how even when I had stopped after getting married, I ended up miserable after just 6 months with only one lover, as wonderful as he was, despite being in love with him. "Just sex, was it?" Rolf asked. "Yes, there was never anything else, just sex. The way you smiled at me. The way you kissed me. The way you pleased me. Was it all just sex?" Rolf inquired. He wasn't merely asking, he was questioning whether I had understood my own feelings correctly. I thought about it, recalling what it was like being with him, remembering the emotions we shared when we made love, yes, made love, not just had sex. I realized I had been deceiving myself. While it had often been just sex with most of them, an adventure to participate in and forget, with Rolf and a few others, it had been more than that. Much more. "Do you remember how you reacted when you found out I'd been with another girl while you were on holiday, Jenny?" Rolf asked gently, bringing back memories of my anger. I had shouted, screamed, sulked for weeks, and even been sharp with poor Jim, who was entirely innocent. "Can you imagine how Jim must feel now? Can you imagine how much worse it must be for him?" Rolf continued, his words hitting me like a ton of bricks. I looked up at Rolf, and it hit me like a wave, the realization of what I had done to Jim, how terribly I had hurt him. Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time, they weren't for myself. They were for him, my husband, my love, and I wept as I had never wept before. Heartbroken that I had broken his heart. Rolf held me gently in his arms, rocking me tenderly as I cried like a baby. "I don't know what I can do, but I'll try," he whispered. "I just hope he values you as much as I do. I would do anything, absolutely anything, to have even a small chance of winning Jim back. I vowed to fight against my need to be with other men, praying to God for the strength to resist, to say no, I won't do that anymore. And I would start immediately. Yes, right away. I would tell Rolf to stop unbuttoning my blouse. I will, I'm determined to. I'll tell him to stop immediately. Right now. I mean it, right now. Right now. I'll tell him to stop. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos.